There are stages in a life that never make it onto an album cover. There are rooms no camera ever enters, silences no microphone ever catches, and losses so private they leave a mark only visible when you know exactly where to look. She sold out stadiums for 50 years. She made millions of people feel like the song playing was written specifically for their heartbreak. But what does a woman do when the curtain comes down, when the tour bus goes quiet, when the man she loved most in the world is buried in the ground? What happens to the voice that sang lullabies to a generation, when there is no one left to hear her singing at 3 in the morning? And here is the question that will follow you through every moment of this story. Can someone who gave everything to music, who sacrificed family and sobriety and ordinary love at the altar of a song, finally find peace at 77? The answer is not what you expect, and it will leave you thinking about your own life long after this video ends. She grew up in a world of constant motion. Stevie Nicks was born on May 26, 1948, in Phoenix, Arizona, the daughter of Barbara and Aaron Jess Nicks, and from the very beginning, her life was defined by displacement. Her father worked as a corporate executive for Greyhound, which meant the family relocated again and again, Phoenix to Salt Lake City, to San Francisco, to Los Altos, to El Paso, to Dallas. 7 different cities before she had finished high school. Think about what that does to a child. Every time she began to belong somewhere, every time a friendship deepened, every time a hallway started feeling like home, the boxes came out. The house was packed. The car was loaded. And she was uprooted again. She learned early that attachment was dangerous, that the things you loved could be taken from you without warning and without apology. Her grandfather, A.J. Nicks, was a country musician in Arizona, and he was one of the few constants in her young life. He taught her to harmonize when she was barely old enough to hold herself upright. He sat with her on porch steps in the dry Arizona heat and showed her that a voice could carry something that words alone could not. When everything else was moving, music stayed still. It was the one room you could always return to. She carried that lesson like a stone in her pocket, smooth from years of being turned over and over in her hands. By the time she landed in San Jose, California, and walked into Menlo Atherton High School, she was already composing songs. She was not the most popular girl in school. She was the girl in the corner with a notebook, watching the world and writing it down. She was 17 when she met Lindsey Buckingham in a production of Bye Bye Birdie. He played guitar. She could harmonize in a way that made people stop talking in a room. They became a duo before they became anything else. They formed a band together, Fritz, and spent years playing the Bay Area circuit, grinding through small venues and smoke-filled rooms, discovering not just their musical chemistry, but something far more complicated and consuming than either of them knew how to name. The year was 1971 when they finally moved to Los Angeles together as a couple, recording a duo album, Buckingham Nicks, that the label Polydor released and then essentially abandoned. It sold almost nothing. The record company dropped them. They were young, talented, broke, and invisible, living in a house with 3 roommates and a dream that was beginning to look like a delusion. She cleaned houses to survive. That is not a metaphor. That is a fact. Stevie Nicks, who would one day stand in front of 60,000 people and command a stage the way generals command battlefields, put on rubber gloves and scrubbed other people's toilets. She waited tables. She did whatever she had to do while Lindsey practiced guitar, and she kept writing songs in the margins of waitressing schedules. There is something sacred in that image, if you let it land. The woman with the shawls and the spinning and the tambourine, down on her knees with a mop, refusing to give up, because she believed, she absolutely believed, that the songs inside her were real, that they mattered, and that someone, somewhere, would eventually hear them. Then the phone rang, and everything changed so fast it probably felt like whiplash. Mick Fleetwood heard the Buckingham Nicks album in a record store in late 1974. He was in crisis. Fleetwood Mac had just lost their guitarist Bob Welch, and the band was scrambling. He tracked down Lindsey Buckingham and offered him a spot in the group. Lindsey said he would only join if Stevie came too. And so the two of them, 26 years old, bruised from years of rejection, walked into Fleetwood Mac together. Think about what that moment must have felt like. After the houses she cleaned, after the tables she waited, after the album that disappeared into silence. To suddenly be standing inside a band with a real label deal, real resources, real possibility. She must have held on to that feeling the way you hold a bird. Carefully, afraid to squeeze too hard in case it flew away. The recording sessions for what would become Fleetwood Mac's self-titled 1975 album were exhilarating and disorienting in equal measure. The band was also living through the emotional wreckage of two simultaneous divorces. John and Christine McVie's marriage was dissolving, and Mick Fleetwood's was fragmenting around him. Meanwhile, Stevie and Lindsey were conducting their own quiet war of love and artistic tension. The personal chaos somehow alchemized into extraordinary music. Stevie walked into those sessions with Rhiannon, a song she had written before she even joined the band, inspired by a name she found in a paperback novel. She could not have known that song would follow her for the next 5 decades, that it would become almost more than a song, almost a living thing, a myth layered on a myth, a character she inhabited night after night, until the line between Stevie Nicks and Rhiannon blurred in ways that would unsettle her for years. The album went platinum, then it went double platinum, then triple. Then the band went into the studio for what would become Rumors, recorded in 1976 during perhaps the most emotionally volatile recording sessions in rock history. Lindsey and Stevie had broken up. John and Christine McVie were divorcing. Mick Fleetwood's wife had been having an affair. And all of them were contractually, professionally, and emotionally bound together, showing up every day to make music about the very things they were living through. Stevie wrote The Chain, Gold Dust Woman, and the devastating, brilliant Go Your Own Way was Lindsey's portrait of her, and she had to sing backing vocals on it. She had to stand in a studio and harmonize on a song that was, in many ways, an accusation aimed directly at her. She did it. She showed up. Because the music was bigger than the pain, and she had always known that, from the time her grandfather sang with her on a porch step in Arizona. Rumors was released in February 1977. It became one of the best-selling albums in human history. Over 40 million copies. It spent 31 weeks at #1. It won the Grammy for Album of the Year. And it made Stevie Nicks one of the most famous women on the planet, seemingly overnight. Though overnight had actually taken 9 years of work and failure and scrubbing floors on her knees. The shawls, the platform boots, the spinning, the way she moved across a stage like something between a woman and a weather system. People became transfixed. She was not just a singer anymore. She was a phenomenon, a symbol of something, of feminine mystery and wildness and power. Rolling Stone called her the reigning queen of rock and roll. And she wore the crown with a kind of reckless grace that masked, almost completely, what was happening underneath. Because underneath, things were beginning to fracture. The cocaine arrived gradually, the way most destruction does, not in a flood but in a slow, rising tide. In the late 1970s and through the early 1980s, the music industry was a blizzard of excess, and Stevie Nicks was standing in the middle of it. She has spoken about this herself, with characteristic honesty. She has said that at the height of her use, she was consuming so much cocaine that she burned a hole through the cartilage of her nose. She once told a journalist that she continued, she might have had a stroke or died. She was one of the most famous women on the planet, performing in front of sold-out arenas, and she was, simultaneously, disappearing. The shawls and the spinning and the stage presence, all of it continued, perhaps even intensified, because that is what professionals do. They show up. They perform. They give the audience what they came for. And then they go backstage and fall apart in private. Her relationship with Lindsey Buckingham, already officially over, continued as an emotional undercurrent that ran through everything. The tension in harmonies, the charged silences on stage, the way two people who had loved each other and wounded each other and were still professionally bound together can occupy the same stage and make that dynamic feel like electricity. She had a brief marriage in 1983 to Kim Anderson, the widower of her best friend Robin Anderson, who had died of leukemia only months after giving birth to a son. It was a grief marriage, she later admitted, a reaching out in a moment of unbearable loss. It lasted only 3 months and ended quietly. She had a long, tangled connection with Joe Walsh of the Eagles. There were other relationships, other moments of closeness, other attempts at a life beyond music, but none of them took root. None of them stayed. And then came the thing that was, in some ways, harder than the cocaine. In 1986, Stevie Nicks went into a rehabilitation center in 1986 in Phoenix, not far from where she had been born, and she got sober from cocaine. And the doctors, attempting to manage the anxiety and sleeplessness and raw nerve endings that came with withdrawal, prescribed her Klonopin, a benzodiazepine, a drug intended to ease the transition. What followed was 8 years of a different kind of dependency, one that many people overlook when they tell Stevie's story because it doesn't have the rock and roll romance of cocaine. But she has described the Klonopin years as the worst of her life. She has said she gained 60 pounds. She has said she felt as though she were living inside cotton wool, muffled, slowed, not quite present in her own body. She would stand on a stage and perform and feel nothing. Not the electricity, not the joy, not the connection with the audience that had always been, for her, the reason for all of it. She was sober from cocaine and addicted to a prescription drug, and it took until 1994, 8 years, before she finally went back to a treatment center in San Francisco and emerged on the other side. She was 46 years old when she came back to herself, when she looked in the mirror and recognized the person looking back, when the cotton wool lifted and she could feel music again, feel it in the way she had felt it as a little girl harmonizing with her grandfather, in the way it ran through her like current, like weather, like something alive. What she did next was not what anyone expected. She did not immediately release a triumphant comeback record. She did not rush back to the arena. She went quiet. She gathered herself. She spent time in her home in Phoenix, always circling back to the desert where she began, and she wrote. The writing had never stopped, not really, even in the worst years. There were notebooks. There were fragments. Songs half finished at 3 in the morning in hotel rooms. And slowly, carefully, the way you rebuild anything that has been damaged, she brought those pieces together. She rejoined Fleetwood Mac. She released solo music. She reconnected with the audience that had, astonishingly, waited for her. Because they had. They were still there. The 1997 Fleetwood Mac reunion album and tour, The Dance, was one of the great rock comeback moments of that decade. Watching footage from that tour, you can see something in Stevie Nicks that had been absent for years. Presence. True presence. The kind that doesn't come from performing, but from actually being in your body, in the moment, feeling every word of every song. She spun. She swirled the shawl that had become her signature, her symbol, the thing that was both costume and armor and flag, and audiences wept with recognition. Something had come back. Something essential. The girl who had harmonized with her grandfather on a porch in Arizona was back inside the woman on stage at Madison Square Garden, and you could see it, even from the nosebleed seats. Throughout the 2000s and into the 2010s, she worked with an artist named Mike Campbell. She released solo albums, Trouble in Shangri-La, In Your Dreams, that reminded listeners why they had ever cared in the first place. She toured relentlessly. She became a grandmother figure to a new generation of artists, Taylor Swift, Harry Styles, Haim, Sheryl Crow, women and men who had grown up with their parents' Fleetwood Mac records and discovered in Stevie Nicks something they could not fully articulate, but could not live without. She was inducted, alone, as a solo artist, into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2019, having already been inducted as part of Fleetwood Mac. She is the only woman to have achieved that distinction twice. She stood at the podium and was funny and warm and entirely herself, and when she finished speaking, the room was on its feet. But it is the personal life, the private life, the life that the shawl does not cover, that tells the truest story. She never had children. This is something she has spoken about with remarkable openness. She made a choice, she has said, that she believed was necessary, that she could either be a mother or be a musician who poured everything into the music, and she could not be both. Not fully. She chose the music, and she has said, in different interviews over the years, that she has made peace with that choice. But she has also said, and this is the part that lands harder, that Lindsey Buckingham's children were the closest thing she ever had to children of her own. That watching him build the family she did not allow herself was one of the most complex griefs of her life. The love that was the oxygen inside Fleetwood Mac for decades, the one that powered Gold Dust Woman and the chain and harmonies that still raised the hair on people's arms, was also a love that cost her something she could never name on an album. She has a faith, not a conventional, denominational faith, but something real and present and rooted in the earth, in the moon, in the mystery that lives inside music itself. She has talked about the supernatural dimensions of songs, how she feels that the best songs come through her rather than from her, that she is a conduit for something larger. This is not performance. This is what she actually believes, and it has carried her through decades of loss and excess and recovery and grief. When her best friend Robin died of leukemia in 1982, it was music she turned to. When the Klonopin years stole 8 years of her clarity, it was the faith that something true remained underneath that pulled her through. She lights candles. She keeps journals. She carries the belief that creativity is sacred, that it comes from a place that is older and deeper than any of us, and that honoring it is a form of devotion. At 77, Stevie Nicks is still here. She is still touring. She still owns a stage the way very few living performers can, not through athleticism or spectacle, but through the simple, devastating power of absolute authenticity. She takes care of her voice with the seriousness of a surgeon caring for her hands. She still writes. She still wears the shawls. There is a shawl for every era, it seems, every mood, every metamorphosis, and the shawl is still both costume and armor and flag, but now it is something else too. It is a through line. It is the visual proof that she is still her, that the woman who stood on the stage in 1977 and made the world fall in love with Rhiannon is the same woman standing here now, older and wiser and softer in some places and harder in others, but continuous, still whole. She watched Lindsey Buckingham have his open-heart surgery in 2019, the same year he was asked to leave Fleetwood Mac. The two of them, after everything, after decades of love and argument and harmony and silence, could not find a way back to a shared stage. And there is something unutterably sad about that, if you let yourself feel it. Two people who made something extraordinary together, who built something that will outlast both of them, who sang each other's hearts out for the world to witness, sitting in separate rooms now. Separate silences. She has spoken about Lindsey with a care that suggests the complexity runs deeper than any interview can touch. She said once that Lindsey was the great love of her life. And she said it like a woman who has learned to live inside that sentence rather than fight it. At 77, she is learning to live fully in the time that remains. She has said, in recent years, that she is more deliberate now, that she chooses things with intention rather than avalanche, that she has learned, perhaps too slowly, she would say, that presence is more valuable than output. She calls her dog by name in interviews, and her eyes go soft. She talks about her nieces and nephews. She talks about the young artists who come to her for guidance, and the way she sees herself in their hunger and their terror. She gives them the thing her grandfather gave her on that porch step in Arizona. Not just technique, but belief. The belief that what you carry inside you is real, that it matters, that someone will eventually hear it. She has outlasted almost everything that should have ended her. The cocaine, the Klonopin, the heartbreaks, the industry's many attempts to define her on its own terms. The grief that stacked up, Robin and others. The dissolution of the romance that made her who she was. She is still standing, still spinning, still wearing the shawl. And now I want to speak directly to you. You probably came to this video for a reason. Maybe you grew up with Stevie Nicks. Maybe her voice was the soundtrack to something important in your own life. A first heartbreak, a long drive, a season when everything was falling apart and music was the only room you could stand to be in. Or maybe you were younger, and you found her the way young people always find the things that matter. Sideways, through a friend, through an algorithm, through a playlist that started somewhere else and ended with Rhiannon playing in your headphones at midnight and something in you going, yes, that is the thing. What Stevie Nicks' life shows, if you are willing to let it, is that the things that shape us are almost never the things we planned. She did not plan to clean houses at 23. She did not plan to spend 8 years inside a pharmaceutical fog. She did not plan to love a man for 50 years without ever fully having him. And she did not plan for the shawl, that simple, flowing, swirling piece of fabric, to become the symbol the whole world recognized. It just happened. It was just what felt right, on stage one night. And she kept it because it was hers, and because it moved the way she moved, and because sometimes the truest things about us are the ones we stumble into without meaning to. You have a shawl too. Maybe not literally. Maybe it's a habit, a ritual, a place you return to when the world gets too loud, a corner of a room, a particular song, a way of breathing that you learned from someone who loved you. Whatever it is yours. And Stevie Nicks' story is asking you something, right now, before you close this video and go back to the rest of your life. It is asking you whether you are living the life that is actually yours, or the one that was handed to you by circumstance or expectation or fear. Whether you are still writing the songs that are inside you, whatever form they take. Whether you have let the losses define the edges of what you are willing to feel, or whether you are still willing to walk out on stage, at any age, in any year, and let yourself be fully seen. She is 77 years old. She has lost more than most people know. She has survived more than she should have. And she is still out there, still spinning, still wearing the shawl, still making the audience feel, somehow, that this song was written for them. What is it going to take for you to do the same?